They told her she didn't qualify for a mortgage, but Jasmine knew the truth ran deeper than numbers on a paper. When the bank receives an unexpected call, everything changes in an instant. What will happen when the power dynamic shifts? Let us know in the comments below. Jasmine Walker stepped into the bank, her heels clicking against the pristine marble floor. She had rehearsed this moment in her head for weeks. Every form double-checked, every financial document neatly stacked in her leather folder. Her credit score was solid, her income more than enough, and yet, a nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach warned her this wouldn't be simple. She ignored it. Today was supposed to be a milestone, the day she took one step closer to home ownership, a piece of security that for generations her family had been denied. She had done everything right, played by all the rules, and now it was finally her turn. She adjusted her blazer and approached the mortgage officer's desk. He was a middle-aged man, slightly balding, with a nameplate that read Michael Talbot, Senior Loan Officer. At first, his smile was automatic, the kind of polished customer service expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning," she said, sliding into the chair opposite him. "Good morning, Ms. Walker. Jasmine Walker." She handed over her folder, confident in its contents. He took it, flipping through the paperwork with an almost bored expression. "All right, Miss Walker, let's see what we have here." She sat upright, poised, waiting for him to acknowledge what she already knew. Her qualifications were solid, but as he turned the pages, his expression shifted ever so slightly. His fingers hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Jasmine caught it immediately. She had seen that hesitation before. Her stomach tightened, but she said nothing. "Not yet." Michael cleared his throat. "So you're applying for a conventional mortgage?" "Yes, that's correct." He nodded, but his fingers drummed lightly against the desk, another sign. "And you're self-employed?" Jasmine tilted her head. "I own a consulting firm. My business has been thriving for the last 6 years. All of my income statements and tax returns are included in that file." He continued flipping through, his brow slightly furrowed. "We typically like to see at least 2 years of consistent WAT2 income." Jasmine took a slow breath. "And, as you'll see in my records, I have over 6 years of documented earnings. My income has increased every year." He nodded again, but there was something calculated in his expression. Right. Well, let's take a look at your credit score." His eyes scanned the page, and this time Jasmine saw it clearly, the smallest flicker of surprise. Her credit score was excellent. Michael leaned back, shifting in his chair. "All right, well, let me run this by underwriting and see where we land." Jasmine frowned. "Wait, see where we land? Is there an issue?" Michael hesitated just long enough for her to know the answer was yes. "No issue per se," he said, forcing a smile. "It's just that, well, sometimes self-employment income can be a bit tricky for approvals. It's just about risk assessment, you understand." There it was. Risk assessment. Jasmine folded her hands in her lap, willing herself to stay composed. She had heard enough stories to know exactly what this was. She had seen black professionals, doctors, lawyers, business owners, jump through hoops just to be treated like anyone else. She leaned forward. "I understand how the process works, Mr. Talbot. I also know my financial profile meets and exceeds the requirements for this loan. So, what's the real issue?" Michael's smile twitched. He glanced toward the other desks, almost as if checking if anyone was listening. "No issue," he repeated, his voice smooth but insincere. "We just need to make sure everything checks out." Jasmine sat back. She wasn't going to beg for what she had rightfully earned. "Fine," she said. "How long will underwriting take?" "Hard to say," he replied, suddenly non-committal. "Could be a few days, could be a couple of weeks." "Weeks?" Jasmine's jaw clenched, but she caught herself before reacting. I'd like to speak with your manager. Michael's smile flickered. Oh, that's not necessary. I think it is. He hesitated, then stood. I'll see if he's available. Jasmine exhaled slowly as he walked away. She could feel eyes on her. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe she had simply learned to recognize the way spaces changed when someone like her demanded what they deserved. A few minutes later, Michael returned, but this time his posture was stiffer, different. Ms. Walker, he said carefully, before we move forward, I just need to verify a few more details with our underwriting team. If you'll just have a seat, I'll make a quick call. Jasmine watched him closely. He wasn't making a call to underwriting. He was calling someone else. And then something shifted. The moment the call connected, she saw it, the color draining from his face, the stiffening of his fingers around the receiver. His eyes darted toward her, and this time, the composure cracked. Yes, sir. She's right here. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Who exactly had just answered that phone? Michael's fingers tightened around the receiver, his face unreadable, but his eyes flicked back toward Jasmine, as if she were suddenly a problem he had no idea how to solve. Yes, sir, he said again, his voice lower now. She's still here. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't even blink. She simply watched. There was a pause. Whoever was on the other end of that line was speaking now, and whatever they were saying had turned Michael's confident, dismissive demeanor into something much more uncertain. Jasmine leaned back slightly in her chair, resisting the urge to smile. Good. Michael cleared his throat. I understand, but, His eyes flicked toward the hallway leading to the private offices, then back at her. He forced another smile, this one even more uncomfortable than before. Would you like me to, transfer you to my manager? Another pause. Then, as if the voice on the other end had given a direct order, Michael's entire body stiffened. No, sir. I'll handle it personally. He hung up the phone, swallowing thickly, then turned to Jasmine with a smile so forced it looked painful. So, Ms. Walker, he said, clearing his throat, I believe we can move forward with your application immediately. Jasmine folded her arms. Oh, just like that? Michael's jaw tensed. Yes. It seems there was a slight miscommunication regarding your eligibility. But I've reviewed everything, and I see no issue moving forward. Jasmine just stared at him. He had barely looked at her file before acting as if she didn't qualify. Now, after one mysterious phone call, she was suddenly the perfect candidate. She tilted her head. Who was that on the phone? Michael's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Just someone from corporate, verifying some details. Liar. Jasmine wasn't stupid. Whoever that was held power over him, and by extension, over this entire situation. But why? She leaned forward, her voice smooth but firm. You know, I'd actually love to speak to them myself. Michael's fake smile twitched. That won't be necessary. I think it is. I assure you, Ms. Walker. She held up a hand, silencing him. For the last 10 minutes, you've been implying I don't qualify, that my self-employment is a risk, that underwriting might take weeks. But now, after a single phone call, you've suddenly changed your mind. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Forgive me for wanting an explanation. Michael's grip on his desk tightened. He was unraveling. I assure you, everything is fine. We just need to get a few signatures and... A new voice interrupted. I'll take it from here. Both Jasmine and Michael turned. A tall man in a navy suit had stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. His dark brown hair was slicked back, and his sharp gray eyes locked onto Michael like a wolf assessing prey. Michael instantly straightened. Mr. Langston, I was just about to... Langston held up a single hand, and Michael immediately stopped talking. The shift in power was undeniable. Langston turned to Jasmine, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Walker, I apologize for the inconvenience. If you'd like, we can finalize your mortgage application right now in my office." Michael's mouth opened, but he didn't dare speak. Jasmine glanced between them, then slowly stood. She could feel the tension in the air, the way Michael looked like he was about to throw up, and the way Langston barely acknowledged him at all. Something had just happened. Something bigger than her mortgage application. She nodded. "Lead the way." Langston turned without another word, walking toward the private offices. Jasmine followed, but as she passed Michael's desk, she slowed just enough to meet his eyes. For the first time that morning, he looked genuinely afraid. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just smiled and kept walking. Langston's office was sleek, modern, and far more private than the open desks outside. He gestured for Jasmine to sit, then took his place behind a large mahogany desk. "I'm sure you have questions," he said, clasping his hands together. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. "A few." He nodded. "I'll be straightforward. The call you just witnessed was from one of our most significant corporate partners. They took an interest in your application." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Took an interest?" Langston's lips pressed together for a moment. Then he sighed. "Ms. Walker, I won't insult you by pretending this bank has always been fair in its lending practices. You and I both know how this system has historically worked against black and minority homebuyers." Jasmine said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "But this morning, someone with considerable influence made sure that would not happen to you today." She studied him. "Who?" Langston hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. "I don't have permission to disclose that." Jasmine's fingers drummed against the armrest. Someone powerful had stepped in on her behalf, but why? She narrowed her eyes. "So if that phone call hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been approved?" Langston didn't flinch. "Not today. No. Honest." For the first time since she walked into this bank, someone was being honest with her. And now, Langston slid a folder across the desk. "Now, your mortgage application is being fast-tracked for approval. Your loan officer," he practically sneered the words, "was about to make the process deliberately difficult for you. That will not be happening." Jasmine exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about a house. It never was. It was about power, who had it, who didn't, and how quickly things changed when the right person made a call. She picked up the pen and opened the folder. "Let's finish this." Jasmine flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the loan agreement. Everything was in order. No last-minute tricks, no hidden fees. After all the resistance, all the excuses, now she was being handed exactly what she came for. It should have felt like a victory, but instead it felt like a puzzle she hadn't quite solved. She signed the final page and slid the pen back across the desk. Langston took the folder, giving a satisfied nod. "Congratulations, Ms. Walker. You're officially on your way to homeownership." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You didn't have to do all this." Langston's eyebrow twitched. "Excuse me. You didn't have to personally step in. Someone told you to, someone important, and I want to know why." Langston's expression didn't change, but something in his posture stiffened. He tapped a finger against the folder as if considering how much to say. "It's not important." "It is to me." Langston sighed, pressing his fingertips together. "All I can say is that the person who called has a vested interest in ensuring you weren't discriminated against today." Jasmine tilted her head. "A vested interest in me, or in making sure this bank doesn't get bad press?" Langston's lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time he looked genuinely uneasy. "Both." Jasmine didn't respond right away. She could feel the answer hovering just out of reach, waiting to be pulled into the light. She had spent years learning how to read between the lines, how to hear what wasn't being said. The pieces were starting to connect. You know them personally, don't you? She asked, watching his reaction carefully. Langston hesitated. I've worked with them before, yes. She studied him. He was too polished, too careful with his words. This wasn't just a corporate decision. It was personal for someone. And then suddenly, she knew. It hit her all at once, like a memory she hadn't realized she had buried. She sat up straighter, her voice lower now. It was Elijah, wasn't it? Langston blinked. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. His reaction was all the confirmation she needed. Elijah Carter. The name sent a chill through her. It had been years since she last saw him, but she hadn't forgotten. The way he moved through rooms like he owned them. The way people listened when he spoke. He had always been the one to pull strings from behind the curtain, never directly in the spotlight, but always controlling it. And now he was controlling this. Langston exhaled through his nose. I can't confirm or deny that. Jasmine shook her head, a dry laugh escaping her lips. You just did. Langston didn't respond. She stared at the signed documents in front of her, the weight of what just happened sinking in. Elijah had stepped in, made a call, and just like that, everything changed. But why? She hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade, not since she walked away from him, from the life he wanted to build with her. He had been brilliant, ambitious, dangerous in the way powerful men could be. And now, after all this time, he still had the ability to alter the course of her life with a single phone call. Jasmine exhaled slowly. I didn't ask for his help. Langston nodded. I know. And I don't owe him anything? You don't. She tapped her fingers against the desk, weighing her next move. But he clearly thinks I do. Langston didn't deny it. Jasmine stood, smoothing the front of her blazer. Thank you for your time, Mr. Langston. But if Elijah Carter thinks he can just step into my life again without warning, he's about to learn otherwise. Langston gave a small, knowing smile. I had a feeling you'd say that. She picked up her bag and walked toward the door, but just before she stepped out, Langston's voice stopped her. Miss Walker. She turned slightly, glancing back over her shoulder. Be careful, he said. Jasmine's lips curved into a smirk. He should be the one who's careful. And with that, she walked out of the office, her mind already racing with the confrontation she knew was coming. Jasmine stepped out of the bank, her pulse steady but her mind racing. She had fought her own battles for years, never needing anyone to intervene on her behalf. And yet, with one call, Elijah Carter had reminded her that power didn't always have to be earned. It could be taken, given, and wielded by those who knew how to play the game. But she wasn't a pawn. She slid into her car and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she hadn't dialed in years. She hesitated for only a second before pressing call. The line rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. I was wondering when you'd call. Jasmine exhaled sharply. Don't flatter yourself, Elijah. A low chuckle. Come on now, you can't be mad at me for doing you a favor. You mean interfering? Call it what you want, he said smoothly. But I'm guessing you just walked out of that bank with exactly what you came for. Jasmine tightened her grip on the wheel. I would have gotten it on my own. Would you have? He let the words hang in the air just long enough for them to sting. Yas, you know how these places work. You know the hoops they make us jump through, even when we shouldn't have to. I just made sure you didn't have to waste your time. Her jaw clenched. You didn't have the right. Elijah sighed on the other end. I had every right. Silence. Jasmine stared out the windshield, her mind flashing back to the last time she saw him. Years ago, when she walked away, certain she was making the right choice. He had always been too much, too powerful, too controlling, too comfortable in a world where influence meant everything. And she had wanted to build something on her own, not in his shadow. And yet, here they were. Where are you? She asked, voice steady. Downtown, he replied. My office. Stay there. She hung up before he could say another word. Elijah's office was exactly what she expected. Glass walls, dark furniture, an entire floor that overlooked the city, like he owned every inch of it. When she walked in, he was standing near the window, hands in his pockets, watching her like he had been expecting this exact moment. Still dramatic, I see, he said with a smirk. Still arrogant, I see, she shot back. He gestured to the seat in front of his desk, but she ignored it, folding her arms instead. Why did you do it? Elijah exhaled, stepping closer. Because I could. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. He studied her, his expression softening just a fraction. Yes, I know you. I knew exactly how that was going to play out the moment you walked in there. They weren't going to approve you. They were going to make you fight for something you already earned. And what, you think I can't fight my own battles? You shouldn't have to, he said simply. Jasmine hated how effortlessly he said it, how easy he made it sound. Like fairness was a luxury she should just expect, rather than something she had to demand. She shook her head. I didn't ask for your help. You never had to. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She had spent years putting distance between them, years proving she didn't need him, and yet here he was, reminding her that he could still pull strings in her life whenever he wanted. She took a step forward, forcing herself to look him directly in the eye. This doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change anything. Elijah tilted his head slightly, studying her like he was seeing something she wasn't saying. Are you sure about that? Jasmine hesitated, just for a second, and he saw it. That was the problem with Elijah Carter. He always saw more than she wanted him to. She let out a slow breath. Stay out of my business, Elijah. His smirk faded. You are my business. Jasmine turned before he could say anything else. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the polished floors. She didn't look back. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. But as she stepped into the hallway, something lingered in the air between them. Something unfinished, something inevitable. She had won today. She had gotten what she came for. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over.